Two police officers stood at the edge of a quiet Fairview street, their leashed dogs restless and snarling. From the corner, a young black mother, Emily James, approached in her car, her newborn son asleep in the back seat. The officers flagged her down, suspicion in their hardened eyes. She explained she had just left the hospital, but her words were dismissed. In an instant, the dogs were unleashed, lunging at her as she shielded her child, claws and teeth tearing into her arms. Bloodied but defiant, Emily rose, pulling a badge from her pocket, an FBI credential flashing in the chaos. If this moment felt intense, prepare yourself, because what comes next is darker, more dangerous, and far more powerful than anything you've seen so far. Fairview had always been described as the kind of neighborhood where nothing bad ever happened. Perfectly trimmed lawns, children riding bicycles in the evenings, neighbors who greeted one another with polite smiles. On the surface, it looked like the embodiment of peace and prosperity. But beneath that polished exterior, an invisible current of fear flowed through every street. People whispered behind closed doors about the security guards who acted more like enforcers than protectors, about sudden disappearances that were never explained, about powerful figures who seemed untouchable. Fairview was a place where silence was survival, and everyone knew it. Emily James didn't come to Fairview by choice. As a young mother, all she wanted was a safe home for her newborn son, Noah. With his tiny breaths warming her chest and his fragile fingers curling around hers, Emily carried a world of responsibility in her arms. To the residents of Fairview, she was just another single mother trying to start fresh. But behind her calm eyes and gentle demeanor was a woman trained for battles much larger than anyone could guess. Few knew that Emily had once worked with a federal agency, her skills sharpened by years of undercover missions. She thought those days were behind her, that motherhood had given her a different calling. But Fairview was about to remind her that shadows never really fade. It began on a cool autumn evening. Emily had just returned from the hospital with Noah, still recovering from the exhaustion of childbirth. She stopped by a small grocery store on the corner to buy essentials: baby formula, bread, and milk. Her steps were slow, her body still aching, but her heart carried a quiet joy. By the time she reached the gates of Fairview, night had fallen. The street lamps glowed softly, casting long shadows across the pavement. That's when she noticed them. Two security guards leaning against their vehicle, their postures too relaxed, their eyes too sharp. "Hey, you!" One of them barked as she walked past. Emily froze, instinctively clutching Noah closer. "We got a report of a shoplifter. Matches your description," the other guard sneered, stepping into her path. Emily's voice was steady but firm. "I've just come from the hospital. This is my newborn son. You've made a mistake." Her calm words did nothing to sway them. The guards exchanged a look, the kind that carried unspoken intent. One of them pulled out a baton and tapped it against his palm. "Empty the bag," he demanded. Emily felt the air grow colder. She could sense the hostility dripping from their voices. She knew this wasn't about a false report. It was about control, about intimidation. She glanced around, seeing a neighbor peeking through their curtains but quickly retreating. Silence again. No one was coming to help. Her instincts screamed that something darker was about to happen, and she was right. Because what began as an accusation would soon spiral into a night that Fairview would never forget. The silence of Fairview was broken by the sharp command of one of the guards. "Step aside, ma'am. We'll search the bag." His tone wasn't one of procedure but of power, dripping with the arrogance of men who thought they owned the streets. Emily James stood motionless, and Noah clutched against her chest. To them, she looked like any exhausted young mother coming home from the hospital, vulnerable, fragile, and easy to intimidate. What they didn't know was that behind her calm eyes and steady breathing lay years of federal training. Emily was no ordinary woman. She was a seasoned FBI agent who had faced far worse than this. But tonight was different. Tonight she wasn't protecting a witness or dismantling a cartel. She was protecting her son. "I've told you," Emily said, her voice firm. "I just returned from the hospital. My child needs rest. Let us pass." The taller guard sneered, circling her like a predator sizing up prey. "Sounds rehearsed. People like you always have a story." His gaze darted to Noah, then back to her. "Maybe we'll see how much truth you're hiding." Emily's pulse quickened, not from fear for herself, but from fear that one reckless move could put Noah in danger. Her FBI training whispered strategies: stay calm, control the pace, gather intel. She scanned their uniforms, noting the HOA insignia, the radios clipped to their belts, the leashes attached to their snarling dogs. Every detail filed into her mind like evidence. The younger guard stepped forward, grabbing for her grocery bag. Emily pivoted, pulling it away before he could touch it. "That's enough," she said, her tone shifting from polite to commanding. It was the voice she had used in interrogation rooms, the voice that once made hardened criminals flinch. But here the guards only laughed. "You think you can order us around?" The younger one mocked, his grin full of malice. He shoved her shoulder. Emily stumbled but kept her balance, her body instinctively twisting to shield Noah. The baby whimpered, his tiny cries piercing the night. Porch lights blinked on. Curtains shifted. The neighbors were watching, but none dared step outside. This was Fairview. Silence was survival. The taller guard gave a sharp nod. "Release the dog!" Emily's eyes widened. "Don't!" she snapped, her FBI badge still hidden in her coat pocket. Revealing it now would only escalate matters. These men weren't acting under any lawful authority, and she couldn't risk exposing her identity without backup. The leash unclipped. The dog lunged. Emily dropped to her knees, curling around Noah, her body forming a shield. Teeth sank into her arm, tearing through fabric and flesh. Pain flared white-hot, but Emily didn't cry out. Her grip tightened around her son, every muscle fueled by the instinct of a mother and the discipline of an agent. From across the street, a young man's phone camera captured everything: the brutality, the blood, the image of a mother protecting her child against a system gone rotten. And though Emily bled, she knew this was only the beginning. By morning, Fairview was no longer quiet. The video had spread across every social media platform like wildfire. In less than 12 hours, millions of people had watched Emily James, a bleeding mother shielding her newborn son, being attacked by security guards who were supposed to protect the community. The image of her crouched in the street, clutching Noah while blood dripped from her sleeve, had become a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked power. News vans crowded the edges of Fairview. Reporters shouted questions at residents, but most refused to speak, terrified of the same guards who had terrorized Emily. Yet the silence that had once defined the neighborhood was cracking. The video had pierced the shield of fear. Outsiders were watching now. The world demanded answers. Emily sat inside her modest home, her arm bandaged, Noah resting against her chest. The baby's soft breathing was a reminder of what she had fought for, and what she was still fighting for. She had faced cartel leaders, cyber criminals, and organized syndicates in her FBI career, but nothing had ever cut as deep as the sight of her child nearly being harmed. This wasn't just about Fairview anymore. This was personal. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages. Civil rights groups wanted to speak with her. Journalists begged for interviews. Even some of her former colleagues from the Bureau reached out, offering quiet support, but warning her to tread carefully. Emily knew the pattern. Powerful men would scramble to bury the story, to discredit her, to protect their empire of fear. But she wasn't about to stay silent. Outside, the protests began. At first, a handful of people gathered at the gates of Fairview, holding signs and chanting for justice. By evening, hundreds filled the streets. Mothers carried their children on their hips. Students held up phones playing the video on repeat. And elderly residents, people who had once whispered behind curtains, now stood in the open, shouting against the corruption that had chained them for years. Inside the guard station, the very men who had attacked Emily watched the chaos unfold on television screens. Their arrogance had turned to unease. They hadn't expected her to survive with such resilience, much less to become a rallying cry for the city. "She's just a mother," one of them muttered. But even he didn't believe it anymore. Deep down, they sensed there was more to Emily than they realized, and they were right. That night, as Noah slept soundly, Emily spread papers across her kitchen table, maps of Fairview. records she had quietly pulled from public databases and notes from her own observations. She was no longer just a victim. She was an investigator again, the FBI agent she thought she had left behind. The attack hadn't broken her. It had woken her, and as the protests grew louder outside her window, Emily vowed to uncover every hidden hand behind Fairview's corruption, no matter how high the conspiracy reached. The protests outside Fairview's gates had grown too loud to ignore. What began as a handful of voices chanting for justice had swelled into a wave that stretched across the city. Yet inside the neighborhood, the air was thick with unease. Guards patrolled with sharper eyes, homeowners avoided eye contact, and whispers spread about the woman who had dared to fight back. Emily James stayed inside her home, but not in silence. Each night, after putting Noah to sleep, she returned to her training. Her kitchen table had transformed into a command center. Newspaper clippings, neighborhood records, and HOA financial documents all were neatly spread before her. While the world saw her as a victim, she was quietly slipping back into the role she knew best: investigator. Her first discovery came almost too easily. Through property records, Emily noticed that nearly half of Fairview's homes were technically owned by shell companies. Digging deeper, she traced them back to a single name: Charles Baker, the charismatic president of the HOA. On the surface, Baker was a philanthropist, a man who donated to schools and appeared in every charity photo op. But Emily recognized the pattern: fronts and false facades. She had seen cartel bosses wear the same mask of generosity while laundering millions through real estate. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. Baker wasn't just running a neighborhood association, he was running an empire. The guards who attacked her weren't rogue actors. They were pawns in a much larger game. Still, Emily knew information wasn't enough. She needed allies. Carefully, she reached out to Maria Lopez, a civil rights attorney known for her sharp legal mind and unshakable courage. Their first meeting took place in a quiet diner outside Fairview. Maria leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as Emily laid out the evidence. "You're telling me the HOA is tied to money laundering?" Maria asked, lowering her voice. Emily nodded. "And possibly higher. The guards who attacked me were too confident, too reckless. That kind of protection doesn't come without someone powerful covering for them." Maria tapped her pen against the table. "This could get dangerous fast." Emily's voice was steady. "It already is." Back in Fairview, the pressure on Emily mounted. Anonymous notes appeared on her doorstep. "Drop this or else." Cars idled outside her house late into the night. Still, she pressed on, quietly planting her phone in public spaces to capture conversations, following paper trails that led from HOA accounts to offshore holdings. Each piece of evidence made the picture clearer and more dangerous. One evening, while reviewing a stack of documents, Emily froze. A familiar name appeared in the records: Senator Daniel Ross. He was no small figure. Ross was a rising star in politics, a man hailed as a reformer. But here, his name was tied to suspicious donations funneled through Baker's companies. Emily leaned back in her chair, the weight of the discovery heavy on her shoulders. This wasn't just about corrupt guards or a crooked HOA president. She had stumbled onto a conspiracy that stretched into the halls of power. For the first time since Noah's birth, Emily felt a tremor of fear. Not for herself, she had faced worse. But for her son, for the life she wanted him to grow up in. The stakes had never been higher, and the shadows of Fairview were only beginning to reveal themselves. The morning sun rose over Fairview, but its golden light did little to ease the darkness closing in around Emily James. What had once been a quiet suburban neighborhood now felt like enemy territory. Each glance from a neighbor carried suspicion. Each passing car felt like it lingered too long. She knew eyes were watching her, waiting for her next move. The first direct threat came in a chilling form. Emily awoke one morning to find Noah's stroller tipped over on her porch, its frame slashed, and a note pinned to it. "Accidents happen. Don't push your luck." Her stomach clenched, not in fear for herself, but in a primal rage that anyone would dare threaten her son. She scanned the street, her instincts sharp, but whoever left it was long gone. Emily called Maria Lopez immediately. When the attorney arrived, her face hardened at the sight. "They're trying to scare you off," Maria said, her voice tense. "They're underestimating me," Emily replied, fire flickering in her eyes, but intimidation quickly escalated to surveillance. Black SUVs began parking across from her home. At night, red dots from laser sights flickered across her curtains, silent warnings that her enemies had the resources to strike at will. Emily moved Noah's crib into her room and kept her sidearm within arm's reach. She had lived under cartel threats before, but never as a mother. The dual weight of her badge and her child pressed heavily on her chest. Emily knew she couldn't wait for them to make the next move. She took precautions, routes to safe houses, burner phones, escape plans. And then she went on the offensive. Using her FBI contacts, though discreetly, she accessed encrypted databases to cross-check Baker's associates. The pattern emerged quickly, accounts tied to offshore laundering, construction projects funded by mysterious investors, and payouts to law enforcement officers who looked the other way. One name kept resurfacing, Chief Raymond Hale, head of the Fairview Police. Realization hit hard. The very department sworn to protect residents was entangled in Baker's web. It explained why the guards faced no consequences for attacking her, because the rot spread to the very top. Her next step was risky. Emily disguised herself and attended a closed-door HOA meeting at a local country club, slipping in under the cover of a distracted crowd. From the back, she observed Baker and Hale laughing together, sipping whiskey as though they owned the world. Their conversation, picked up by her concealed recorder, confirmed her suspicions. They spoke openly of moving funds through the HOA accounts and boasting that even the senator owes us. As Emily listened, her pulse quickened. She had struck gold, but she was also deep in enemy territory. One wrong move and she wouldn't walk out alive. On her way home, headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, following her too closely. She tested the pattern. Every turn she made, the car mirrored. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Noah was asleep in the back seat, his small breaths a reminder of what she was fighting for. With precision born of training, Emily veered off into a dark side road, cutting her lights. The pursuing car sped past, unaware she had slipped into the shadows. For a brief moment, her chest eased, but she knew this was only the beginning. The threats weren't just closing in. They were coming for her family. And unless she dismantled the conspiracy soon, the war for Fairview would cost her everything. The evidence Emily gathered was explosive. Recordings of Baker and Chief Hale discussing their network, documents tying their money to offshore accounts, and whispers of Senator Ross's involvement. All of it painted a picture darker than anyone could imagine. But Emily knew she couldn't hold it forever. The longer it stayed with her, the more dangerous it became. She shared the first pieces with Maria Lopez, who immediately began filing motions and preparing a legal strike. But Maria also knew that this battle wasn't just about law. It was about public perception. So, late one night, they leaked part of the recordings to a trusted journalist. By morning, clips of Baker's voice bragging about owning the cops spread like wildfire across social media. Fairview erupted. Residents who once ignored Emily now marched in the streets demanding accountability. Protests swelled outside the HOA office. News vans camped along the main boulevard. For the first time, Baker and Hale were on the defensive, but with exposure came retaliation. The SUVs returned, this time bolder. Emily's tires were slashed in broad daylight. Maria's office was broken into, files ransacked, though nothing was stolen, just a warning. Even Noah's daycare received anonymous calls questioning his safety. Emily's anger hardened into steel. They could target her, but dragging her child into their war crossed a line. Then came the betrayal. It was late evening when Emily received a secure call from one of her FBI contacts. Agent Mark Daniels, a colleague she had once trusted. He claimed to have new intelligence, proof that could bring Baker down once and for all. Against her better instincts, Emily agreed to meet him in a quiet parking structure on the city's edge. When she arrived, Noah safely left with Maria, and Emily found Daniels waiting. But something in his eyes unsettled her. The smile was too forced, his hands too stiff. "You shouldn't have leaked that tape, Emily," he said, his voice low. "You've made powerful enemies," Emily's chest tightened. "You're working with them." Daniels didn't deny it. Instead, he sighed. "There are deals bigger than you, bigger than me. Walk away, take your kid and disappear. You can't win this!" Her instincts screamed danger. Slowly, she stepped back, her hand brushing the concealed pistol at her side. "If you're in on this, then you know me well enough to understand one thing," she said, her voice cold. "I don't run." At that moment, footsteps echoed from the far end of the garage. Two men emerged, heavy-set, armed, their intent clear. Daniels gave her one last pleading look. "Don't make this harder." But Emily was already moving. With the precision of training and the desperation of a mother, she used the pillars as cover, drawing her weapon and firing controlled shots. Chaos erupted, bullets sparking against concrete. One assailant went down, the other fled, but Daniels disappeared into the smoke of exhaust and gunfire. Emily escaped with her life, but not her trust. The system she once served was more compromised than she had feared. Even inside the FBI, shadows had spread. That night, as she watched Noah sleep, Emily's resolve deepened. She could no longer fight this war with half measures. If betrayal lurked everywhere, she had only one option left: go all in and bring the entire house of corruption crashing down. The courtroom was packed to the brim, reporters scribbling notes, cameras rolling, citizens pressing against the gallery railings. The trial of Charles Baker, Chief Raymond Hale, and Senator Daniel Ross had become a national spectacle. At the center of it all stood Emily James, no longer just a mother from Fairview, but the woman who had torn the mask off an empire of corruption. Her testimony carried weight beyond words. Calm but unyielding, she detailed the night she was assaulted, the threats against her child, and the discoveries she had made while digging into the HOA's finances. Each word landed like a hammer, driving cracks into the facade of Baker's empire. The prosecution unveiled the damning evidence: audio recordings of Baker and Hale laughing about controlling the police, bank statements tracing Ross's donations to offshore accounts, and surveillance logs that proved coordinated intimidation tactics. Jurors leaned forward, faces hardening with every revelation. The defense tried to paint Emily as unstable, a grieving mother who fabricated conspiracies. But when Maria Lopez presented video clips from bystanders, Emily shielding Noah from police dogs, bruises still fresh on her arms, the courtroom fell into silence. Even the judge's stern expression softened. Then came Emily's final words on the stand. Her voice didn't shake. It rang with quiet power. They thought their power made them untouchable. But power doesn't place anyone above the law. If they can do this to me, an agent of the FBI, imagine what they've been doing to families without a voice. This trial is not just about me. It's about every citizen who has been silenced by fear. Today, I refuse to stay silent. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty. On all counts. The verdict sent shockwaves through the city, then across the country. Baker and Hale sat stone-faced, their empires crumbling in real time. Ross's political career was obliterated as he was led out in handcuffs, his carefully curated smile gone. For Emily, the victory was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but the scars, physical and emotional, remained. Yet as she stepped outside the courthouse into a crowd of cheering supporters, she realized this was not the end. It was the beginning of something greater. Weeks later, she was summoned to Washington. In a quiet office overlooking the Capitol, the FBI director herself addressed her. "Agent James, your bravery not only exposed corruption in Fairview, but revealed cracks in the very institutions meant to protect us. We need leaders who cannot be bought, silenced, or broken. We're offering you command of a new anti-corruption task force, independent, national, answering only to the law." Emily accepted without hesitation. Back in Fairview, life slowly began to heal. Noah laughed again, his innocence no longer overshadowed by fear. Neighbors who once looked away now stood united, their community reborn. And at the center of it all, Emily carried both her badge and her role as a mother with pride. Her journey had begun with injustice. It ended with hope. Final ending. Words. Emily James, once underestimated, now stood as the head of a national anti-corruption task force, a mother, an agent, and a symbol of unshakable justice.